Hey, welcome back to this series all about uploading files to the web. In those previous videos, we learned that there's a number of steps that we have to take in order to upload a file from the front end, which includes accessing files on the user's device via an HTML input element with the file type attribute. We also needed to construct an HTTP request either with a form element or with a fetch API, and we need to set the method on that request to post method. And lastly, we needed to modify the content type header on that request to be multi-part form data so that we would actually have access to the binary data of that file in order to send that with the request. In this video, we are going to be looking at working on the backend in order to receive those multi-part form data requests and access the binary data from those files and do something with it. So over in my backend code, I'm working in a Nuxt project that's running in a Node.js environment. We have a couple things that are specific to the Nuxt way of doing things, but Nuxt does surface for us this event.node.rec object, which is actually going to be the node request object. So that lets me grab the underlying node request object that's coming in and do something with it. So for the rest of this, I'm going to be using just node-based APIs that will work across any node environment. So in the previous video, we discussed how uploading a file requires sending a multi-part form data request. And the reason that's necessary is because a file can be very large and it can be too large to send in a single request. So what the browser will actually do is take a multi-part form data and send little bits of data at a time called chunks. And those chunks make up what's called a stream. So they can send little chunks at a time to upload the file, one little bit of data at a time, and we can see how that works on the back end. On the back end in Node, on this request object, Node gives us this on event handler API where we can listen to data events as they come in and then do something with that data. So I'm just going to log the data and let's see what this file looks like as we upload it. So I'm going to upload a photo of Nugget. And if we look at the backend, we see two things came in, these two buffers with a bunch of garbled numbers. What's going on here is Node is receiving that request object as a stream, and the request had sent two little chunks of binary data that Node has to work with. Now, JavaScript doesn't have a way of working with binary data directly, so it has this concept of buffers in order for us to be able to work with this data in the JavaScript environment. So what we can do with this information is actually change our function to return a promise that creates an array of chunks. And every time that the request receives some data, it pushes that data into the array of chunks. And when the request has completed, then we can actually resolve this promise with the concatenation of all those chunks and turn it into a string. And that's going to make sense in a moment when we actually use it. So with that function set up, we can actually await that function to be called to grab the body and see what the body looks like. So if I upload that file once again and we look at the body, we see something interesting. So down here at the bottom, we see this form boundary data. And here in the middle, we actually see a whole bunch of gibberish. And this is actually going to be the bytecode that represents the contents of that file. So it's going to be kind of long, but that is essentially what the body of the request looks like. And in many cases, the frameworks and tools that we're using have something already built in that does this work for us and allows us to access the body of a request. For example, in Nuxt, they provide a global read body function. And if we compare that upload to what we created ourselves, we see it looks very much the same with the binary file contents and this WebKit form boundary separating the different parts of the multi-part form. But we're still left with a few problems. We have access to the request body, but it's separated by those WebKit boundaries into different chunks. So we'd have to build a parser that separates those chunks in order to get each different input or each different part of that form submission. We also have binary data for that file input, and we're not actually doing anything with it. So we probably want to write that to the file system somehow. But there's still a bigger problem yet, and that is that the way that we are reading the data into our application, we're basically grabbing all of those buffered streams or those streamed buffered objects and storing them in memory. And if we're dealing with files that could be very large, we could actually exhaust the memory allocation for our server and it could fall over. So the solution is, once again, working with streams. So when the request stream comes in, instead of streaming or piping the data into a memory object that is going to grow as those requests comes in, we can pipe that information into another stream, for example, something that writes that data to the file system, so that only as the chunks come in, that data gets written to the file system, and we never actually grow and exhaust the memory. Now that's about as far down as I want to go into the low-level concepts of what's going on under the hood. And now I want to come back up to solving the problem without reinventing the solution. And that's going to be reaching for a library that is actually going to be able to parse these multi-part form requests and grab the files out of the request body and take the stream and pipe it to right to the file system without us having to do all of that ourselves. So today I'm going to be using this library called Formidable. Now, Formidable works with the node request object, which we happen to have from the Nuxt event here. And so I'm going to just modify this do something with node request to use this Formidable library. So it's still going to return a promise because that is a syntax that I prefer, and Formidable uses callbacks, but we can essentially create this Formidable form object by instantiating the library, and then we can parse the request object. And once that is finished parsing, we are going to have access to the fields from the form and the files. And so I'm just going to check if there's an error. If there's not an error, then we will resolve this promise with a single object that contains both the fields and the files. So let's see what this looks like. So now when I upload this file and I go to the console, I can see that I have an object in the body, and that object contains one property called file, which is the name of that file input. And that file is going to be a persistent file that has all of these properties on it, some of them which are going to contain the path to the file on the disk. Now, by default, Formidable is going to rename the file to this funky thing so you don't have file collisions, and it's going to use the temp folder on your operating system. Now, of course, you can modify that to use the original file name, or you can do some other way of constructing a new file name, or you can tell it which path to write to disk. But the important thing here is that Formidable is going to receive that multi-part form data request, and it's going to parse that request object, receiving the stream of data one chunk at a time, and it's going to handle writing those chunks into the file system so that you don't have to, and you don't have to worry about running out of memory. Now, there's just one more little thing I want to fix in my code, and that is that I only want to pass multi-part form data requests to that Formidable handler, and otherwise I want to go ahead and just read the body with a convenient body parser. So in my code, what I'm going to actually change is I'm going to instantiate the body variable. I'm going to grab the headers from this global get request headers function that Nuxt provides for us, but ultimately just surfaces the request headers. And then I'm going to check if the content type of this request includes multi-part form data. And if it does, then it's safe to parse that request with this multi-part form data parser using Formidable. It's basically the same function that I wrote before. I've just renamed it to something that's a little bit more explicit to what's going on. And if it's not a multi-part form data request, then we can go ahead and just read the body as we would normally. So this way I have an API that is robust enough to accept both multi-part form data, or if data is sent in the body of request as plain text or URL encoded data like normal. Okay, so that was kind of a lot, and I just want to do a little recap that when we send a multi-part form data request, or when we need to upload a file, we have to send those requests, or the browser has to send those requests one chunk of data at a time using a stream. And that's because we can't put the entire file in the request object at once. And that means that on the back end, in order to receive those requests, we have to expect receive those chunks of data one little bit at a time through a stream. And when we get a stream, we don't necessarily want to capture all of that data and store it in memory. We want to pipe that stream somewhere else so that we can receive the data, do something with it, and then move on to the next bit of data. And usually that stream is going to be something like writing to the file system. So instead of having to do that with a low-level parser that we built ourselves, we use a tool like Formidable and check whether we are receiving a multi-part our form data request or not. So hopefully that all makes sense. I know we got kind of low level, but hopefully I also showed you like a high level solution that you can work with. And if you have some questions or something was confusing, please go ahead and throw them in the comments. I'd be happy to get back to you, or ping me on Twitter. And if you want to keep track of what's going to come in the next videos, be sure to subscribe to this channel so that you'll get notified when the next video comes out. I personally am having a lot of fun working on this video series, and I hope you are enjoying it as well. I'll catch you next time.